Hello, everyone. I thought today I would go over a few things about string and math, and I'd also thought I'd also like to go over the official Java documentation. Java is the best documented language I've ever seen. So we will do that, and also just warn you about some things of dealing with strings that can trip you up if you're not prepared for them. So the first thing is, let's look at the Java documentation. I'm going to share my screen, and that's a skimmer, I think is what they call them. And now let me bring up a browser. Make this about as simple as it can be. And the two major classes we were talking about in this lesson are string and math. So let's start with math. To find the Java documentation for the math class, I enter Oracle Java 11 Math, and it will be the first hit. And this tells you everything you need to know about the math class. In particular, all those methods that were mentioned in the chapter are going to be described here, plus a lot of others. And we haven't really gotten into this yet, but you see min here. You can give min two doubles, or you can give min two floats, or you can give min two ints or two longs. And if you give it, say, a float and an int, Java will widen the int to be a float, and you will wind up with this particular method. And if these are just the one-line descriptions of the methods over here. If I click on one of them, it takes me to a much more complete description. So that's the math class. One thing I do want to mention here, and we'll talk about this more in just a moment with string, but all of these methods are marked static. Every method in the math class is marked static, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But just to kind of get that down, all methods in the math class are static, and we'll learn what that means in just a moment. Now let's go after the Oracle Java 11 string class. Again, it will be the first thing that comes. And this is the official documentation on the string class, same format. We see some things here that are deprecated. That means don't use them because they're no longer in favor, and they may be removed from the language at some point. So some methods here in the string class are marked static, but most are not. And again, I'll talk about that in a few moments. But everything in the math class is static. Some things in the string class are static. Now, let's talk about comparing string objects. And perhaps the single most common mistake people make, and it was called out on one of the videos in the book, is they try to use equals equals to compare strings. Other languages do that. Java does not. Equals equals does mean something, comparing strings and other objects. Strings being objects, and int and double and the stuff that we've done before being primitive data. Strings are reference data. but don't use equals equals. So let's walk through a little program, and I'm going to comment out this stuff because this is talking about next line versus next, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And I'll just comment that out. So here I'm setting up a string to be the string of one character, capital C. And here I am making a new string. Strings are immutable. That means they cannot be changed. Once I have set this string to capital C, I can't change the string. I can change what this reference points to. I can change the reference to point to a different string, but I can't change the string content itself. So anyway, I set a string AC to reference the string that's a capital C. And then I generate a new string, which is AC to lowercase. So that's going to be lowercase c, AC lowered. Now I create a new string, lowercase ac versus lowercase a uppercase c. Lowercase ac is the string, one character, lowercase c. So AC lowered and AC are both lowercase c's. And let's run this and see what I get when I say is AC lowered equal AC. And we'll also see what I get if I use the equals method on the string object. And I'll try to look at that in just a moment. So anyway, let's save this and run it. And it says AC lowered and AC are the same object, which is this line 44 right here. And that is false. AC lowered equal AC is false. But AC lowered and AC are equal. That would be this line where I'm using the equals method. And I knew I was going to lose that. We'll just run it again. AC lowered and AC are equal is true. So they both contain the lowercase, the same string, and in this particular case, the lowercase c character, but they are not the same object. They are two objects who happen to have the same string value in them. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about, and they talk about in one of the videos for this lesson about you don't use equals, you should use the dot equals method. So let's look at this dot equals method right quick. And here it is. And it compares this string to the specified object. The result is true if and only if the argument is not null and a string object that represents the same sequence of characters as this object. I told you before, read like a lawyer. Software people try to write like lawyers, and Oracle's done a very good job of that right here. So it returns, yes. It returns a Boolean. Booleans can be true or false. It returns true if the given object represents a string equivalent to this string, false otherwise. So this is the documentation of equals. We'll note that equals is not a static method. So let me get a little more into what that means. This, well, I take that back. We'll delay that just a bit until we get to length. Let's switch and talk about next line and next. Now, the problem people get into with next and next line is they try next and next int and next double all work really well together. And it just happens that it's going to work like you expect. Next line doesn't work quite the same way. And so my general advice is if you want to use next and next int and next double, stick with next and next int and next double. If you need next line, don't use next and next int and next double. And you won't have to worry about this for quite a while, but there are things you can do to read an entire line and convert it to an int or double or something like that. And they're not nearly as hard as it would seem. But what's the difference? Next reads next and next int and next double. We'll start skipping white space. A white space is a character, a tab, a new line. Next, next int, next double. We'll skip white space until they come to a character. And once they come to that character, they will read it as a word if it's next, an integer if it's an int, next int, and a double if it's next double. And woe be to you if you try to give a double or character to next int, okay? I'm sure you'll figure that one out. But it then starts reading the contiguous characters until it comes to more white space, at which point it stops. And those non-white space characters that it's read then become the next or next int or next double value. Next line, but that means that next cannot read spaces. If I want to send a program an entire sentence with spaces in it, next just won't do what I want to do, okay? I'm going to need next line. But next line consumes white space differently than the others. And so things can get out of sync and very confusing. And that's why I say just don't mix them. But let's see what we can do with next line. And if I run this, so if I enter hello world there, and that will be on line 27, I enter the next line, and then I print next line returned, and I print what this next line method from the scanner returned. And it returned hello world, everything including the spaces. Let's enter hello world again, and we will process this using next instead of next line. And what we see is hello world again. I have to read two nexts. That's because next stopped at this space right here in my input. So the first one read the hello, the second one read the WORLD, and so I print out next was called twice. The first one returned hello, and the second one returned world. So that's kind of the difference between next and next line. Next will only read a contiguous set of characters. It will stop at white space. Hello world will read the entire line up to the next new line, but its handling of new line and white space is different than next int, next double. So I suggest not trying to mix and match there. And now let me comment this out again. By the way, I will try to remember to put this on Blackboard, but if I forget, somebody bug me if you want it. Now, let's talk about those static methods and the ones that were not static methods. The ones that were not marked static are referred to as instance methods. And so let's look up the length method here in string. Well, it'll be easier to go up here to the summary, and there is length, and it returns the length of the string equal to the number of Unicode code units, characters, in the string, and it returns an int, and it's not marked static. Now, if we think about this, strings can have different lengths. So if I want to know the length of the string, I've got to tell Java which string I want the length of. So here, I've declared a string called 6 chars. I'm not feeling very creative today. And I can take 6 chars and call the length method on the 6 chars object, string reference. And then I'm just printing that out. Now, so let's go on and do that. And it says the length of 6 chars is 6. Now, one bit of confusion that students have is when to use a static method and how, and what about these instance methods. So, and I said that some methods on string are static. So if I go up here to my summary again and look at value of, I can call value of with any number of types of parameters, but we'll just go after the int. And it is static, which means I don't want an object reference to call this method. A static method needs to be able to do whatever it's got to do with just its parameter list. Whereas we saw with the length method, it worked on the object that it was called on. Length was called using that particular object reference. If I had called it against AC, I would have gotten a different length, but I called it on 6 chars, and so that's the reference I was giving it. When I'm going to use value of here, value of being a static method does not have an object that it can work with. Instead, everything it needs has to be in that parameter list. And what value of does is it returns the string representation of whatever the parameter was. Here, the parameter is an int, and it returns a string with the characters representing that int value. And so you see, I'm not giving it a string here. I'm not giving it a string reference. I'm giving it the string class because it's a static method. Whenever you call a math method, all methods in the math class are static. So it's math.random or math.sign something or something like that. And again, if we run this again, string using the value of this guy was 5464, which is here. Now, had I tried to do that, it would not compile, and I'll just cut it briefly. You see I get ugly red here, which means my program's not compiling. It's just not going to do anything good. But value of, let me get a string representation. And I just printed it out there. Let's see, what else? Those are the big things I want you to do for the lab. Do not use loops. I don't want you to use any Java language elements that we have not covered to date, and loops are the big one. So that'll be a challenge. And again, bug me and I will make sure that this program gets out into Blackboard. Feel free to contact me with questions and we can take things from there. So in this little video, we have looked at where you get documentation for the Java language, for the classes in the Java language at least. And we've looked at next line versus next. We've talked about how strings are immutable. And so if you to uppercase a string, you don't change the string, a new object is generated and a reference to that object is passed back. This will be clearer that that's the way things work later in the course, but I just want to plant the seed. Strings are immutable. That means they can't be changed. If you're calling a method that looks like it changes the string, such as to lowercase, what's really happening is that a new string is being created and a reference to that new string is what's being passed back. We talked about you don't compare objects with equals equals. For example, in string, you use the dot equals method. And we talked about static versus instance methods. So I hope this helps. Those are some things that seem to be a little lightly covered in the book, and I just thought I would try to head some problems off at the pass. Send me your questions, love to see them, and we'll use the collaboration forum to discuss them. So, hope everybody has a good evening. See you later.